the next panel, the second panel before lunch. Oh, is it next? No, yeah, right before lunch. Thank you. Yes, it is. The next session, though, is on technology and sustainability. It's sponsored by Cisco, who has a remarkable leadership role in this realm. And it will be moderated by Alex Haddad. Dr. Haddad holds the Canadian Research Chair for eHealth Innovation at the University of Toronto. Does a lot of work with David Naylor, our prior moderator. He is the founder of the Center for Global eHealth Innovation. He's a physician, so he understands the individual health issues. An innovator, educator, and public advocate whose mission is to optimize health and wellness for all through the innovative use of information and communication technologies. On a more practical level, Alex is one of the warmest characters I've ever met. He thinks a lot about human happiness. And he said yesterday in an exchange I had, if we're not thinking about human happiness, why bother? And I thought that was an excellent way to characterize the motivation behind a huge proportion of the work we're trying to address here. So, Alex Haddad and his panel, and I'll leave it to Alex to introduce his panelists. Thank you.
And good morning, and I'm very happy to be here today and honored to act as the moderator of this panel, which I hope you will enjoy very, very much. As we're on a tight schedule, I would like to set the scene a little bit and invite you to start thinking about issues as the panel unfolds. So what's the role of technology? And if we look back to the beginning of the 20th century, it was clear that humans had used technology to build cities and to progress. But movies like Metropolis in 1927 started to show a dystopian world in which machines were really hindering our ability to live long and happy lives. So I think if we are looking for the ideal city, we need to ensure that they don't dehumanize us. Then in 1948, Orwell finished 1984, which was a play in numbers. And he gave us Big Brother. And again, another dystopian world in which machines controlled humans. And once again, we were dehumanized. So the messages we were getting throughout the 20th century about the impact of technology on human life were not very positive. And then right at the end of the century, in 1999, we got the Matrix, in which cities were really an illusion created by machines, and we were the ones who were making these entities sustainable. Now we are at the beginning of the second decade of the 21st century. What kind of cities do we want to have? If we found Aladdin's lamp, what would we wish for? I would wish for a long and happy life in which we can use the power of the technologies we have had the opportunity to enjoy to connect us as much as possible and to harness their power to enable us to achieve optimal levels of quality in our lives. How many of you don't have a mobile phone? Okay, not a single hand up. How many of you have more than one mobile phone? At least 30% of the audience here. Are they improving your lives? So once again, if we had the opportunity to find Aladdin's lamp and the genie came out and gave us one wish for the ideal city, what would that wish be? And I'm going to come back after the panel because now I would like to invite the panelists to join us and to start stimulating us during this amazing forum. Welcome, panelists. Please come in. And we are going to have presentations in alphabetical order. And I will be introducing them as they take their turns. So our first panelist today is Tyler Hamilton, who is a journalist and green economy activist. He just started as editor-in-chief of Corporate Knights magazine, which is a quarterly publication distributed in Canada through the Globe and Mail, and the United States through the Washington Post. When I asked him for his wish, he said, "I wish that big money institutions change the perception of risk, and that not investing is the risk, that they understand that not investing in the green economy is the risk." And I said, "Why, Tyler?" And he said, "Because we are stuck otherwise." So, Tyler Hamilton.
Hello. First, before I start, I'd like to just emphasize that, this panel is about technology. Technology is not the solution, but it's part of the solution. And what I'm going to do is go through some technologies that I've seen over my years as reporting for the Toronto Star on clean technologies, and kind of do a review of some of the more practical things that we can start using today. Pipelines. We hear about pipelines breaking throughout Toronto almost every week because of the aging infrastructure. Pipes are 50, almost 80 years old, well beyond their lifespan. 15% of the clean water that goes through our water infrastructure is lost due to leaks, and there's 11 billion shortfall annually in the U.S. To keep this stuff repaired. Technologies such as the pipe driver, this automated robot packed with sensors, is developed by a pressure pipe inspection company in Ottawa, or in Mississauga. And it basically drops into the pipeline and detects leaks that allows city planners to better spend their money on repairs and to better prioritize. We know that cars represent a quarter of the emissions in the city, and that the congestion in the city represents 3.3 billion in lost productivity, as well as premature deaths related to the smog from these vehicles, which contribute to overall air quality. There are solutions. I'm a big fan of AutoShare and Zipcar and other car share services like that. I think that when people join these services, it forces them to prioritize. Should today I take the transit? Should I walk? Should I take the bicycle? Should I sign out an AutoShare car? This is moving towards collaborative consumption, a more peer-to-peer approach where your neighbor might let their car be rented out to another neighbor, and I see that as a trend picking up steam. Congestion can also be addressed with GPS satellites, pay-per-use insurance, per-kilometer road pricing that basically keeps people out of different areas of the city at different times of the day, relieving congestion and also reducing emissions. I'm a big fan of electric bikes. This particular bike is made by Magna International, and I'm seeing a trend here where older people who don't want to get on bikes because they might face a headwind one day or they don't want to navigate up hills. This is a way to get people onto bikes who might otherwise avoid getting on the cycle. A big issue is trash. Not everything is 100% divertible. From landfills, we do end up having plastics and paper that are left over even after recycling, because it's really called downcycling. You can only recycle something so many times before it's useless. So one technology is from Montreal-based Enerchem, which basically can take non-compostable and non-recyclable materials and recycle their molecules, turn them into green chemicals and ethanol, and create this kind of virtuous cycle within a local environment where you're taking your residual waste and turning it into green chemicals and green fuels for your city. Wastewater treatment plants are another big opportunity to improve upon. And basically these are the things that take the stuff we flush down our toilet and clean them up and put this stuff out into lakes. But this stuff is still filled with phosphorus and nitrogen and other nutrients that cause dead zones in our rivers and lakes. So, there's opportunities to run these more efficiently with combined heat and power systems, whether they're based on traditional generator systems or fuel cells. There's some jurisdictions that are using solar-assisted CHP that reduces their energy costs even further. In Vancouver, there's a company called Astera Nutrient Technologies that has figured out a way to take the phosphorus and nitrogen and other nutrients right out of the wastewater as part of the treatment process. And it creates a very high-grade fertilizer that can be resold into the local market or shipped where it's needed. And in exchange, it prevents this nutrient from getting out into lakes. Ideally, I'd like to see less big transmission lines carrying dirty power from big central generalized generation plants into cities, and more wind, solar, and other renewables that make cities more district energy systems that are self-contained. But this is difficult because renewables are often intermittent. So distributed utility scale storage, I think, is a solution we can start experimenting with today, whether it's flywheel technology from Temporal Power, a company in Toronto, or Hydrostar is a company that's putting big plastic bags under the lake and using the weight of the water in the lake to compress the air to spin generators and produce electricity. I don't see how we can't have Earth Hour every hour of every day. The picture on the right should be every evening, because we do waste a lot of power in buildings. Lights are on when they shouldn't be on. Fans are spinning when they shouldn't be spinning. So we can make these buildings smarter, and there's everything from LED technologies, lighting technologies, to advanced sensors that can detect CO2 levels in a room and determine whether or not there's individuals in the room, and shut off fans and pumps and heaters and other things accordingly. Increasingly, these technologies are available, and they're getting more sophisticated. And concrete, these buildings are made of concrete, and concrete is very energy intensive, representing about, well, if you include the cement industry, 5% of global emissions. So there are many ways of making these concrete blocks and concrete casts much more to reduce their carbon footprint. So one option is to take the CO2 stream and convert it into algae, which is then dried and fed back into the kiln to displace the use of fossil fuels. This is being done in St. Mary's, Ontario, with a company called Pond Biofuels. Lafarge is growing its own crops in adjacent land and using that to displace its use of fossil fuels. And I think there's huge opportunities for capturing waste heat from industry. In Ontario alone, you can get 3,000 megawatts from some of the industrial and commercial facilities out there, and we've barely scratched the surface. It's the reason why I brought my coffee cup here. Actually, it's basically turned my coffee cup into a battery. The Stirling engine on top captures the waste heat and spins the turbine. And I like to bring this into schools to show students that, you know, how energy is being wasted every day. And this is just a small example of how we can convert waste heat into work. And my last slide here is just of a monarch butterfly that I took at Sauble Beach this year, and the caterpillar that it came from. And I just see that as a representative of the transformation that our cities need to make. Thank you very much.
Bravo, good example. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Professor George Hazel. In addition to the information you have in the program, I would like to emphasize the fact that George was the first professor of transportation in Scotland, and that happened in 1987. And in 2005, he was made an officer of the British Empire. When I asked him, George, what would your wish be? He was very quick in saying that he wishes for cities that maximize exchange space for people. I said, what does it mean? He said, we need to reduce movement space, because people are the things that make cities work. So George, welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm quite often in Canada because I'm part of the MMM group as well, although I'm based in Edinburgh. And we're basically city analysts. I'm a civil engineer originally, but for the past number of years we've been working in cities. And things are changing in mobility. So sustainable mobility, which is my area, is changing very rapidly. And one of the first challenges that we will face is to examine everything we do just now, which I did in the 90s when I was Director of City Development, to say, do we do this just because we've always done it? If so, we need to change. And so that's a big challenge for a lot of organizations, both in the public sector and the private sector, because mobility is changing. First thing I do when I go to a city is that I walk about. I walk about for half an hour to an hour, and it tells me right away who's got priority. First priority should be people, because I'm the guy with the purse, right? I'm the guy spending the money. So the whole city should be orientated around people, not vehicles. And you get that's what's going to drive the economy in the future. And that's why cities got to be rebalanced. In the future, cities like this will not work Now that's not a political statement, it's not an anti-car statement, it's a process of arithmetic. Because there are only two types of space in cities, exchange space and movement space. You need to maximize exchange space because that's what drives the economy, the environment, and the quality of life, and minimize movement space to get to places like this in Boston. Because that's what cities are all about. That's the vibrancy, that's the economy of cities. And the only place movement space can come from is exchange space. So you need to minimize movement space, and that means maximize the efficiency of that movement space. And that can only mean one thing, that the backbone of any system is exchange space maximization and transit to move people around. This is in Finland. Two types of exchange going on here. Having a coffee but on the same side of the table. Important informal exchange of watching the world go by is part of what makes cities work, part of what gives it that vibrancy. Chairs are very important because the more chairs you have, people sit down, the longer they stay in the city like a good party and the more money they spend. It's very simple. It's not rocket science. So lots of chairs. There's a great example in San Diego where the business community have just spread chairs around the sidewalk for people to sit on in Little Italy in San Diego. We did this in Edinburgh. I was director of city development in the 90s in Edinburgh. This is the one this one is the Royal Mile. 4 lanes wide, we reduced it to 2 lanes and increased exchange space. Retail turnover went up 40%, but we had a terrible time with the retailers. So like all Scots, we had a party and we changed things. We need to move on and change Princess Street, which overlooks the castle. Look at all that movement space compared to the exchange space. That needs to change. And we worked with business. We used the language of business. We worked with the local newspaper, who never support the council, but this time they did. And the next day when it worked, when we redistributed traffic, it was all thanks to the evening news, but there you go. And so you've got to talk the same language and bring people together because it's all in our common interest. Now, this redevelopment of rebalance of exchange space, movement space has been going on a long time. This is Portland, Oregon. But there's a new movement happening around the world. I think the next slide is in Seoul, in South Korea, where they have literally taken out this 60s freeway, just taken it right out, not added capacity, and recreated the river that was there in the exchange space. Good for the economy, good for the environment, good for quality of life. That's going on all over the world. I think the next one is in New York, where a friend of mine, Jan Gehl, professor of urban design at Copenhagen, he's just taking space back from movement space to exchange space and just putting chairs out. You don't need to spend a lot of money on this, and give people a taste of recreating what the city is like. And that is happening all over the world. As I say, we started that in Edinburgh. Copenhagen is a great example where they took 3% of parking space every year to recreate that space. And the reason why it doesn't work, if you base it purely on the private car, is arithmetic. You've got a finite number of space, a number of square footage or square meterage, and you can only get certain units along. Transport is not about vehicles, it's about moving people and goods. And so you have to maximize the productivity of that space. Otherwise, you take more and more space from exchange space and you kill your city. This is San Diego. The only way they're going to do their plan, their economic development plan of houses and jobs in the downtown area, is to move from 23% transit share to 43% over 10, 20 years. It can be done, but you need just to move people in a different way and rebalance your city. Now, how are we going to do that? How are we going to get people to change their behavior? Well, this is where technology and smart cities come in. This is the future of mobility. That is not negotiable. That's what's going to happen. We're going to have to move from an operational model to a retail model. All of you are going to have individual mobility plans tailored to your needs. And it'll be through smartphones and smart apps and whatever. And every city in the world, this is some work we've done for Siemens, every city in the world is on the same mobility path to that, the 3 things I've just shown you. And that is the hope, because through choice and incentivization and nudging behavior, you get huge shifts because you're combining 2 things. Something that's good for the city and that's something of value to the individual. And that's a big lesson. I call it the ambulance analogy. What makes a good ambulance service? Well, the strategic one is important, but also the personal one. When I'm ill, I need 1 ambulance to arrive at the right house in the right time. Both 100% right, and cities need to answer both questions to be successful in the future. And for too long, this is, do you have Marmite here, or Vegemite? Yeah. Only about 10% of people love Marmite, 90% hate it. And that's what we've been doing for many years. We've been doing Vegemite, Marmite plans that are good for us, but taste awful, and individuals don't like them. And we've got to change that and say, okay, let's just work with people in terms of nudging that behavior. And central to this, and this is a big new business, there's going to be mobility management businesses controlling and balancing all of this to give us value. And that's where the money is. The Octopus card in Hong Kong generates 50% of its £13 billion revenue through other value-added services, not transport on their transport card. And that is the capital that will fuel all of this stuff. It's happening already. Google Wallet, real-time information on smart apps on your phone, the parking guidance system in San Francisco that's just being piloted, wonderful stuff that's going on all over the world. And that revenue stream is the new business model that will make this happen. I think this might be the last one. I don't know if it takes 20 seconds to come up, but basically, the dude in the front is me in 1967. And I wish I still had that guitar. It's an original Fender Strat. The point is that change is going to happen. You can't change that. And we need to take that change and mold it for the benefit of our people and to build sustainable communities. Thank you very much.
Well, what a nice session. I hope you're enjoying it very much. We had a journalist, then an engineer inspiring us. Now we have a software renegade who became an entrepreneur and a climate change activist. And he speaks publicly about the need to kick our fossil fuel habit. When I asked him, Tom Brand, what would you wish? He said, I wish for a price on carbon. And I said, why? He said, because if we have a price on carbon, we then change every market everywhere. So, Tom, welcome.
Improv 101, who knew I was going to take an acting class? My talk will be remarkably similar to Mr. Rifkin's. That is not by design, but I want to talk about how cities are absolutely essential. They're our most important asset in building our energy internet, and the energy internet is the only way that we have any hope of kicking our fossil fuel habit. That is not negotiable. Carbon is building very quickly. It is not hyperbole to say that how we deal with carbon in the next 20 years is the end game of industrial civilization. And if you don't believe me, go past the blogosphere and go to the real science. It is urgent and it's not optional. But buildings, and I showed an American city here for a reason, we need to think past our own backyards. We need to think past our own backyards in two ways, in space and in time. We need to think longer term, and we need to think of ourselves as a global citizens. But more importantly, our buildings in these cities account for 40% of our energy use. It all comes into our cities through the old grid. Lots of power gets produced and shoved downtown. That will continue no matter how efficient we get in the downtown core. But that old grid is the biggest and most expensive, most complicated machine that humankind has ever built. And that's what we need to replace. But if we're going to replace this grid with clean energy, it's only fair to compare apples to apples. Fossil fuel infrastructure has had trillions of dollars of capital deployed, and clean energy needs the same kind of capital, the same kind of scale of capital if we're going to really compare. If clean energy is really going to step up to the plate and replace fossil fuels, you're not going to get it by spending a tenth of the price that you spent on fossil fuels. So we don't have a plan for an energy internet in North America, but anybody can draw a line on a map, and so I did. The point is that it's a balanced grid with many different sources of energy coming from many different places, right? That's why we are part of a North American grid. We are thinking outside our own backyard. Wind in the prairies, tidal power on the East Coast. And it's a myth that we need fossil fuels to power our civilization. If North America was this big, you would need solar panels, today's solar panels, with today's engineered solar farms, the size of my pinky's fingernail, to provide all of our primary energy needs: nuclear, natural gas, coal, the works. So it's a myth that we need fossil fuels. We just need to deploy infrastructure at a comparable scale. The factories will hum, the lights won't flicker. We all know what a solar panel looks like. What these do in a downtown core is have Toronto Hydro spend less money on capital infrastructure bringing power downtown. So 80 cents a kilowatt hour on Toronto rooftops is not that bad a deal. But it is true also that solar power can be baseload. You can produce power after the sun goes down. This is a big plant in the American Southwest. All you do is you store the heat, because you produce the electricity using heat, not PVs. And those white blocks are giant thermoses. So you unlock the thermos at night and you've got baseload solar power. These are being built at the scale of coal plants, gigawatt in size, right? Wind only works if you have it in many different locations. It's true it's intermittent, but the wind always blows somewhere, right? Pretty regularly. It comes from the sun, heating the atmosphere. It happens pretty regularly. You can set your clock by it. The holy grail of clean energy is called deep geo or enhanced geo. Anywhere. Drill down 6 to 8 kilometers, fracture that rock, take out the heat, you have 24-hour baseload power. An MIT study using engineering numbers, not theoretical numbers, there's between 3 and 30,000 times our primary energy needs available to us on EGS. Hydro is currently the big workhorse, provides about 20% of our power. It will remain providing about 20% of our power into the future, even if we expand it, because energy use will go up. So hydro is already a mass. So you can think about hydro, think about EGS. If we had developed EGS the same way we developed hydro, it would be a workhorse today. Ocean power, I'm not that big a fan of, but one thing that is possible on a big scale is tidal power. So on the East Coast, in the Bay of Fundy, you can produce 7 gigawatts of very reliable, very cheap power, and you would change the tidal flats by less than 4%. That's what that 7 gigawatts comes from, constrained by not changing the environment around it. So what is the energy internet? It's a continent-wide distributed set of clean energy sources built at the scale where you spend trillions of dollars and you deploy that capital. I'll tell you how in a moment. It's regional distribution. All the wires are two-way, so you have smaller power plants dotted throughout. And most importantly, when it comes to cities, it's local demand response. You match response to supply. And then you have storage. So at Mars, we have hydrostore and temporal power, which Tyler mentioned, underwater compressed air energy storage. So, but absolutely key to underpinning this entire energy internet, to make clean energy reliable, is you have buildings responsive. So I've built a hotel in downtown Toronto called Planet Traveler, and I have reduced my energy load by 75% from business as usual, and I've done it at a profit. I unlocked 5% of that building's capital to deploy geothermal, solar PV, drain water heat recapture, and LED lighting. I buried my geothermal pipes under a city-owned laneway, so I've proved you can do it in a very dense downtown urban core. This is a photograph of the world's first tower, so like it's a 50-story tower, geothermal retrofit. You can drive a truck into the bottom of these parking garages now and retrofit geothermal on these big buildings. So what I'm saying about my little hotel applies to the Scotia Tower. And this model of 5% and 75% scales, right from my hotel right up to the Empire State Building. And so we know where the capital is. It's sitting in our buildings. And when I reduced that carbon, all I needed to do was take a longer view. I have a 5 to 6 year payback. So a CFO, when they look at their energy use for their building, for any of these buildings in this picture, look at it as being core to your business. Then you're willing to invest money where it's not a 9-month or 12-month payback. 5-year payback will get it for you. If you view energy use as core to your business, it's just a change of psychology in the CFO's mind. Suddenly, you can unlock 75% reductions at a profit because the loan payments are less than the energy savings. It's not rocket science. We know where the capital is. Biofuels, I'm putting in as an addendum. These are tough. We'll never replace all our liquid fuels. Maybe a third. Study by the U.S. Department of Energy said we can replace a third of our oil with cellulosic ethanols. It's third generation, non-competing with fuels, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, energy geeks like me keep talking about this stuff. We know where the capital is. It sits in the pension funds. We know where the policy options are. It's a carbon price, cap and trade, cap and dividend, whatever you want to call it. And we know where the technology solutions are. We've already invented them. They're here. So this conversation needs to go outside of this room if we're going to have less of what we just saw on that screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. Now, we'll have with us Patrick Spencer, who is probably the only member of the panel who, of this group that represents Big IT Corp. and he has a background in management, in administration. He also has a certification in systems auditing. And I asked him, Patrick, what would you ask the genie? And I really want you to think about that for the conversation we are going to have during the rest of the session. He said, I wish for cities to become places where people could work well. And I said, why? He says, because of my children. When they grow up, I want them to find places where they could develop their talents to their maximum level. He has 2 kids, Aiden who is 4 and Kira who is 2, and he would be sharing some of his insights with us. Welcome, Patrick.
So here we go, the F1 approach to PowerPoint. First, welcome. Do I store some time here? So basically, we've been asked to look at technology in the context of sustainability and smart cities. Specifically, what are the new technologies out there and how are they being deployed, which you see here. And the basic premise is technology alone won't solve all of our problems, and I'm an advocate of that, absolutely. Okay, 4 mega trends that I'd like to share with you. 1, in the developed world, we're getting older. I know I am. Population growth is increasingly concentrated in the developing world. Economic power is shifting to developing nations, and we're becoming urbanized. It's estimated by 2050, there'll be 9 billion people on the planet, 6 billion of those will be urban dwellers. Some definitions. What does SMART mean? Sustainability. At its most basic level, it's about new technologies improving lives. And this is all the more important in this context of urban growth. Sustainability, sustainable development tend to be used interchangeably. The most widely accepted definition is that of the Brundtland Commission, meeting the needs of the present without jeopardizing the needs of the future. And there's economic, social, and environmental capabilities. We live in the world of the Internet of Things. What does that mean? It used to be there are more people on the planet than connected devices. That changed prior to 2010. It's estimated by 2020 there'll be 7.6 billion people on the planet, 50 billion connected devices. We already have connected shoes, connected cows, connected trees, and the like. There's an explosion of information. It's estimated by 2015, 2/3 of mobile data traffic will be video. More of this is moving to the cloud. MIT estimated that in 2008 there were 5 exabytes of unique information created. That's ballooned to 1.2 zettabytes today, and that's fairly powerful. That's like everybody on the planet tweeting for the next 100 years. Technology is a broad area. I'm focused on ICT. ICT is part of the solution. The Climate Group released in 2008 the Smart 2020 report. ICT has a footprint, but the benefits can be 5-fold that footprint of ICT. Technology is everywhere, and it's reshaping city lives. It's below the ground, it's on the ground, it's above the ground. Carlo Ratti of MIT talks about smart city in the sense of a computer in open air. We've got smart parking, the Parker application, micro wind turbines, virtual meetings with telepresence. Technology is everywhere. Why are smart cities important? It's less than 2% of the global surface, 75% of the world's energy, 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. In China alone, 2030, we're looking at 220 cities of 1 million plus. In Asia, 400. To put that into context, there are only 35 cities in all of Europe that are 1 million people. The starting points vary. To the left you have Songdo, South Korea, waterfront Toronto, Dockside Green in Victoria. Then there's the developing world, and as people have mentioned prior to me, a lot of the world lives in developing nations. They often lack basic infrastructure, but that's not stopping them moving forward with smart cities in Brazil, Milili Technopark in Kenya. Here's an example of Songdo, South Korea. Basically, South Korea is running out of land. Reclaimed land about the size of Boston, master design, pre-fired, ultra-fast broadband, first fully networked city. Imagine healthcare to the home, and pneumatic garbage collection using smart cards. Now, what can older cities do? Well, making an existing city smart or more sustainable is a greater challenge. But pneumatic garbage collection is not new. It's been around Roosevelt Island in New York since '75. Chicago has 350 green roof projects. Micro-wind turbines are everywhere. You're not necessarily going to see them on houses, but you do see them on PepsiCo's building. Things you may not be aware of, GeoSim Cities, an Israeli-based company, geospatial technology. There are pilots in Edmonton and Vancouver. 100 times the amount of data that Google was collecting through its vans. But from a city planning point of view, that ability to visualize 5, 10, 15 years out is incredible. And if you can add the environmental aspects. Smart work centers, the third location. Right now you can work at home, you can often work at home, you can work at your place of work, go to Starbucks. This is a third location in Amsterdam aimed at addressing traffic congestion, climate change. Started off as a pilot in 2008. There are now 160 of these in Amsterdam, 500 plus across South Korea. Ultra-fast, affordable broadband. If I'd like to see something, I'd like to see this. Waterfront Toronto gets it, 100 megabytes up to a gig. You think big a gig with Google in Kansas City. GigU, a collection of universities in the United States, and they're trying to create these ultra-fast test beds, these living laboratories, and you can build applications above that. Now, scaling and replicating is key. Cisco's playing with the service delivery platform, think ERP of the city, Planet IT Valley, the urban operating system, and basically the founder is a former Microsoft executive. But how do you connect services, devices, third party? That's how you scale and you can replicate. Some leading technologies, IPv6 light bulbs. IPv4 is an old protocol, 4.3 billion addresses maximum. If you could control these with your phone. Oregon State's come up with a way to create solar cells using an inkjet printer. Less waste, less cost, things we can do. MIT, as creative as they are, how about windows that generate power and don't block views? The why, the what, and the how. The why, ICT, is generally understood. The what is of most importance to vendors, and we sometimes disagree. How do you enable a smart city is the biggest challenge today. What are the solutions, policies, privacy, along those lines? A little more recent, IDC came up with a 2011 ICT Sustainability Index, G20 nations, ICT and CO2, and it basically ranked Canada 8th, so suggesting that there's room for improvement with respect to ICT and lowering CO2 emissions. Slide 18. So how far have we come? Well, there's a lot of work still to do. These are the results of a survey, 2009, I believe it was Booz, to say, we have all these pilots, but how close are we to realizing the projections of Smart 2020? Well, there are a series of challenges. Lack of awareness of ICT and its benefits, lack of capital, we talked about sort of financing mechanisms, organizing partnerships, and so on. Now, will technology solve all our problems? No, it will not. It's not a panacea, but if used intelligently, it's part of the solution. I've given you a few examples. There are 102 smart city projects around the world, and I think we can learn from all of them. Nobody's trying to create a robot city. There is room for serendipity, openness, and randomness. Still a lot of work to do, and on that, I thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much to all these wonderful panelists. Now let's try to engage in conversation. And before I open the floor to you, I would like to change hats. I'm a physician and I devote my life to the elimination of unnecessary suffering. That's what I do. Unfortunately, we have a lot of that in cities, more than in rural areas. We are crazier, sadder, more stressed out people. The incidence of schizophrenia in cities is twice as high as in rural communities. We are 30% more likely to be depressed. Stress rampant. So I dream with the day in which, in addition to talking about smart cities and cities in which we sit more and spend more and find new sources of energy, we start talking about having wise cities, happier cities. And my burning question is, how could technology help us do that? So, what's your wish? And how could we turn our wishes into reality as soon as possible? Any takers?
Good morning. My name is Kevin Marcotte. I work for Capgemini here in Toronto and involved in some of the smart meter deployment. So I've seen in my experience a lot of the data that most of you are talking about and all the complexities that come with the various technologies as we try to implement something. And to try to link it into what Mr. Rifkin was saying this morning, there's the idea that we can build locally and go up from nodes. Trying to integrate what we can locally, get that technology locally, and then try to expand and share. While I do believe it, I'm just wondering from everyone's experience here, I see challenges, and the challenges could be all the different technologies have different protocols of communication and different ways of integrating together, and if someone's ready to integrate from the top and someone's ready from the bottom and they try to meet in the middle, they might collide. So I'm just wondering how has that experience that you've seen in each of your lives, and then maybe what are some ideas that we can get around that to continue and make life a little bit simpler?
Okay, and thank you. What's your wish?
My wish is to make life simpler with all of the improvements that are to come.
Thank you. Who would like to respond? Okay, Tom and then George.
Well, on the power side, so there's IT, and then there's great big wires with power flowing on them. On the wire side, the biggest hurdle is that you have a number of different players, producers of power, distributors of power, users of power, and so on, who have different economic interests. So take storage, for example. Sandia Labs had a great report, and they identified 26 different actors who would economically benefit from having storage being ubiquitous on the grid. But not one of those 26 actors would be willing to pay enough to pay for storage. But if you could somehow combine 4 or 5 of those actors and you build some sort of a merchant model, so the same kilowatt hour of storage is used by more than one actor, then you solve that problem. So I think it's a very disaggregated set of economic interests at the grid level. Transmission is different from production, is different from use, and so on. And sort of someone coordinating the economic activity, I think, is one of the biggest barriers.
George.
This is going to go two ways. I'm talking about kind of smart mobility and the way cities work, and indeed the way communities work. Everything that I was talking about will work at street level and community level as well. This is what I was talking about is going to happen, and it'll happen in two ways. The first way, I hope it doesn't, but if I was a betting man, I'd say it probably will, is that the private sector will run with this, and various companies will run with this. Could be the retailers, could be Google, could be a whole host of people. And you might get different systems, and we're being offered different packages to join our lives together. It's already happening. I don't know if you've got Urban Outfitters here. You go into their website, they're not selling clothes anymore, they're selling lifestyle. They're joining up the dots for us, and loads of people are now doing that. The preferred option is if the government or the city council or the public sector were working in partnership with the private sector and setting the agenda, setting the framework, saying, look, you can sell all these value-added services, you can make a lot of money, but we want you to cross-subsidize that to our values, and our values are economic values, environmental and social values. For example, in transit, we want unemployed people to have free transit. That's one of our aims. So we'll franchise you to run the system, but you've got to hit that aim. And that's the combination that I think would be great in the future. But it requires government to try and get their head around this very quickly, because the system has got to be flexible, it's got to be fast, it's got to be adaptable, and the last thing you want, what you were saying, is to back yourself in a cul-de-sac of a proprietary system. It ain't going to work like that.
Okay, thank you very much, George. Anthony, you have a comment, a question, a contribution, and let's see if we can get the last 15 minutes we have before we break for lunch as an opportunity to interact amongst ourselves, even within the audience, not just having the flow come from the audience to the panelists and back. Anthony.
Okay, my name's Anthony Marcil, and my wish is fairly simple from my perspective. And that is, I would like to be able to go into any healthcare provider, whether it's a pharmacy or a doctor's office or a hospital, and have access to the same information that I have when I go onto my computer and access my bank accounts, or I go to an ATM in some remote location in Canada, and I have access to all the information, and I want the government to stop telling me that it's a privacy issue and you can't do it in health, what the bankers have been doing for 10 years at least.
Yeah, and we wasted $1 billion in Ontario. we wasted $1 billion in Ontario, $100 million a year, while Mexico with 125 million provided that to over 50 million people. So we need to exercise our responsibility as civil society and put pressure for that to happen. So that's a good wish. Any other?
Hi, hello. My name's Ursilia
Hello.
Serafini, and I'm with Summerhill Group. I have a very simple wish. I want to control everything from this little smartphone here, from paying for my parking to my Metro Pass to controlling my thermostat at home. So taking, Anthony's comment a step further, and as we plan forward for our cities and our communication, it's to plan for that accessibility and that smart use of all of our information. Because if I have it accessible here and I look around the room and I see people busy on their phones with email, I could be setting my thermostat down 2 degrees or 2 degrees higher if I wanted it. I don't have to get out of my car to pay for parking and go back. I would get my Metro Pass right on here. So I want to know how we can control everything from this little device.
There you go. Okay, I can see some hands here, but I'm using moderator's prerogative here. Any responses from the audience related to that or to what Anthony said? Could you please, Aurelia? And then I will give it to you. So let's see if we can get that going.
So in response to that, if we're talking about wishes and whatnot, will the smartphones be able to dispense the psychotropics or the antidepressants, all these depressed people walking around cities? My wish would be for more imagination. I think there's this almost religion we've found with scenario-based modeling, and now we're getting into really sophisticated game theory and control theory, and just saying if we can really just find the right parameters and just model this thing, we're fine. We're going to figure it all out and we're going to crack the code. I would suggest that using our imaginations and looking at human dimensions that are extremely hard to quantify, and I'm not making any pretensions that that's an easy task or that it's financeable even on a with a conventional pro forma, but the notion that somehow we return to asking the why questions. I mean, when we're kind of buying the systems theory metaphor, hook, line and sinker. Is there a better metaphor for how we actually interact and engage each other? I mean, are there other ways to sort of look at because if you don't have the right parameters or you don't, have the right macro perspective, your analysis is always going to fall short. So what is it that we can really do? What are the real questions we're asking each other? I mean, what about consumption patterns? What about the fact that in every, new urbanist sort of master plan or architecture porn rendering we look at, there's retail everywhere. Is that what public spaces become? People sitting just in cafes or shopping in cooler looking places that we can walk around in instead of driving in? What are we really doing? What are we thinking? So I think my wish would be for more imagination to how we think about living in these cities and why we need to buy the things we need to buy and power the things we think we need to power.
Thank you very much. Todd?
I'm going to bring it back to technology and sustainability. And technology is what I know best. But to answer your question about why can't I do that with my phone? Well, actually, you can. That service is available, and here in Toronto, Rogers Communications just launched it. The problem is no one wants to pay for those, right? It's not like saving energy is like ordering the cable package or the higher speed internet, or you're not really. Consumers don't see themselves getting something in return, even though they are when it comes down to saving money on their bills. So a lot of these service providers have had to be creative in the way that they add these things, and they're treating them more like free applications that kind of piggyback on other services. And in the case of Rogers, they're selling it. The core service is home security. People want to pay for that. I'll pay to protect my home. Oh, and by the way, if I paid maybe a couple of dollars more a month, then I can control my thermostat from my phone. And I think we're gonna have to be more creative with how we introduce these services, because just trying to tell people we're gonna throw all this technology at you to save you money, but you're gonna have to pay for it. And by the way, how much you pay is gonna be more than what you save using it, then it's not gonna work.
Thank you very much. Let me comment a little bit. I think we are at a wonderful place here. Brickworks. This is a place that could act as a scenario planning setting where we could have that kind of discussions in relation to the future of the city, of our society. I represent the Center for Global Health Innovation, and I'm going to plug it here because you paid for it. It was funded by taxpayers' money. And I moved to Canada by choice because I believe that we have a world within a city where we still live in harmony and we still have some good reputation left around the world. So I hope we use this kind of fora as an opportunity to imagine a better future and to create it together. But it requires a lot of courage. And there are people in at least 90 other countries who are willing to join forces with us to do it. Okay? Some people fear that we may be in the post-ideas age, that even if Jesus Christ, Socrates, and Einstein came today, people would not pay attention to them because we are obsessed with the immediate and the easy and the superficial. So we are in trouble. I'm a cheerful pessimist. Any other questions or comments?
I just want to add really quickly something to that. On the idea of imagination and shopping, John Kenneth Galbraith pointed out, famous Canadian at Harvard, pointed out in the 60s that we don't know how to manage a zero growth economy. We just don't know how to do it. So one of the things that we really need to think very hard about is how is it that we use capital, deploy capital, manage capital in a zero growth economy? Because it's impossible to grow the economy in real terms forever. In the short term, let's grow the green energy economy like crazy because we've got a problem to solve. But that's deeply embedded in that attitude is very strong forces that panic when you start talking about the lack of growth. And we don't know how to deploy, use capital when growth disappears. The whole system becomes unstable. So that's something that's going to require a lot of imagination.
George.
Yeah, I think you can't lose the fact that we have to get down from up there. Sure, we need strategic plans and we need scenarios and whatever, but we have to understand what's going on at the individual level, because when you look at city plans throughout the world, people basically want the same thing. And they're trying to get the same thing. And if you look at the trends, you can trace them through every city in the world: aging population, commercialization, suburbanization, motorization, and personalization. What you just said. People want more personalized services because their lives are getting more complex. And to me, the light has gone on for having trying to plan cities for about 40 years, is that by putting the two together and understanding what people want, what people need, and using that kind of retailing principles to nudge behavior and adding value, and putting that together, you get the two coming together. And if you look at the successful cities in the world, they've done that. I mean, there are wonderful experiments that I could never have dreamed of in transport in terms of travel plans and strategic plans. Like in Netherlands, they incentivized car drivers in such a way they found the trigger point, and between 50 and 60% of car drivers changed their behavior out of the peak hour to either travel in their car out of the peak hour or use transit or walk and cycle. 50-odd%, nearly 56%. That is unheard of. The same here. TTC offered their 150 air miles, and I know that Canadians love collecting air miles. 150 air miles if you bought a transit pass. Sales that month went up 50%. We have to understand how that works and put these principles with the strategic principles.
Well, the mic, okay.
Hi.
Welcome.
I have a wish. I wish to understand whether we should go big or go small. There's no doubt that the problem that we face is huge, and we have a short period of time, and Mr. Rifkin has identified the period of time. But as human beings, we have a habit of, when we see a big problem, we try to come up with a big solution. I'm thinking about the big, beautiful, interconnected global financial system, and it was very vulnerable. I'm thinking about how a single oak tree in Ohio could bring an entire electric grid to its knees and leave us without power and a day off, or a couple of days off. I want to understand, what is the best way to go? Because I'm concerned that we as human beings will try to solve a big problem with a big solution, and in the end will rely on a possibility of failure. How do we create networks that are going to work? And the question is, do we go big? Do we go small?
My view is you go small and start big. I mean, I went through the pain of trying to introduce road pricing in Edinburgh. And everybody said at the strategic level, it's great, great for the city. We had a referendum, 74% voted no. Because I didn't understand the second question, is it value for me? And so I think if you start small and understand that, then you can build to big. And know where you're going with the big.
I'm a cheerful pessimist, desperate to be proven wrong. I don't think we can do it. I think we are too complacent or we're too desperate, depending on where in the world you are. Tom, you were talking about a zero growth economy. How about a degrowth economy? As Serge Latouche, a French philosopher, has proposed, that we need to not even small or big, we need to go smaller. Okay? Do we need a pandemic to get some sense and have half of the population of the world wiped out? That's a question that a lot of people are asking now. Can we get unstuck?
Yeah, if I look at it from a city point of view, I think it's both. It's big and small. There's real benefits to master design cities in this context of 400 plus cities of 1 million people. The master plan allows you to do it quickly. But there's also benefit to the more organic approaches, the smaller things that we can do, all of us. So I honestly think the answer is there are benefits to the master plan and the small. They need to come together. There's no one right answer necessarily.
Okay, hold on a second. I think, Tyler, you wanted to say something, and then Tom.
Well, I just want to say what I was trying to emphasize with my presentation is that there's not a silver bullet out there. There's like lots of solutions, and we like to try to have this big vision of where we're going to go, and we don't realize that we can go big with a lot of small things. I'm annoyed by this movement right now that we have to stop putting money into deploying technologies that we have today and demonstrating it, and put more money into R&D, like something's going to come magically out of a laboratory and save our world. And I think that we have to stop thinking that there's some grand big vision out there and it's just going to fall on our lap and save us, and start just working with what we have. And that was just a sample of the technologies that I've seen over the last few years covering this area. And I'm not as much of a pessimist and that's part of the reason why I cover this area. Because
I'm a cheerful one.
If I didn't cover this stuff, and by the way, my coffee's getting cold. If I didn't cover this stuff, I probably would be a very depressed person. So I like to inject a little bit of optimism in my life, and for my children as well.
Yeah, the cheerful pessimism is a gimmick. I don't get frustrated. So when nothing happens, I keep going. So my heart doesn't get broken anymore. And I've seen a lot of colleagues who were very optimistic who just decided to throw the towel. And so Tom.
Ditto on the no magic bullet thing. We've got what we need, let's deploy it. Even though I'm in the innovation game, but I think the big and small comes together in the following simple idea. We think of the market often as being this thing to which we answer. It's like a tiger or a shrub, which has natural laws under which we subsume ourselves. This is the Chicago school coming and going, right? The market is an invention. It's like an iPod. We invented credit default swaps and IPOs and banks and currency and whatever. To marry the big and the small, you send one market signal, price on carbon or whatever it's going to be, and then all the activity changes. So our challenge is to shape the market so that the questions about going big or going small will get answered in an organic, human, local way as everybody changes their behavior to respond to the signal that we've sent. So if the market can do something for us, it's only if we shape it and imbue our values into the market. And that's when big or small, black or white, Chinese or Canadian, you're going to be involved in the same project. You're going to be developing an emergent property, which is going to be a low carbon economy. So to me, they get married when we understand that the market is ours to control rather than something to which we must submit ourselves.
But I want to just add to what Tom's saying. There's a caveat to that, because simply putting a price on carbon, it depends on how you create these market mechanisms. And we're already hearing about a lot of issues arising in the European cap and trade regime, where there's a lot of abuse. So there is the chance of setting ourselves up for failure. So we have to be very, very careful about how we put a price on carbon and whether it's a tax or whether it's through some sort of cap and trade mechanism, because we have to get that right. But generally, I agree that you have to put the price on these externalities, not just carbon. I think we have to build everything into it, whether it's water use or biodiversity. We have to start coming up with this concept of green GDP, where we factor in these externalities that are, right now, they're not priced into the system.
Thank you. Is sustainability worthwhile without happiness, without joy? How can technology help us get both? And we have 1 more minute, and I can sense you already, Jeff, coming. The main sources of unhappiness we have today, apart from depression, which is overdiagnosed, now some people in the US are saying that 1 of every 2 adults are depressed. That's scary. Okay? Some people claim it's the main cause of disability in the world now. Are back pain, noise, and traffic. And most of them are associated with city life. Can we imagine a better city, one that is sustainable and that is enabled by technology? I hope we continue this conversation over lunch. Thank you very much, and let's thank the panelists.